I blocked him right after all that shit happened. I haven't heard shit from that guy since.
Okay, video's going live.
Excuse me. There we go. There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Monday Night. Oh, wait, no, this isn't Monday Night Football. Okay. Wait, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to. Uh-oh. No time for jokes. We got a caller. Hello.
Hello.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, on the phone, we have former
You almost said WWE.
I know, I almost
fucking
did.
hard.
Former ECW referee John Pee Wee Moore. Welcome to the show, man.
What's up? How you doing?
I'm great, man. Let me just say, man, it's truly an honor to have you on the show, man. I was a big ECW fan. To get you on the show, and you agreeing to come on the show, man, I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, I miss the old ECW days back in the 1990s. I often try to remember those days as much as I can.
Oh, don't worry, because we have plenty of questions.
Okay. I got you.
Kyle, you want to go first? All right. Well, I guess I'll go first. Well, first thing that I did not know is that you are actually from the Detroit area.
Yes.
So
I was born at St. John's Hospital.
Okay.
I grew up at 8 Mile Road in Dexter, or 8 Mile in Gratiot.
I know exactly where that's at.
Oh, you're East Sider. Okay.
It's like, yeah, about like, it's Warren, and it used to be East Detroit. Now it's called East Point. I grew up there, and then at about 6th, 7th grade, I moved to Troy. And then I lived in Troy up until, I want to say like 2002, 2003. And then I moved away from Detroit.
Wow. So even during your
I'm still a fan of all the Detroit sports teams.
Well, yeah. Let me ask you about that real quick, man. I know you posted something about the Wolverines this weekend.
Why do we have to relive that?
Look. We all need to vent and get this off of our chest. So
I just lost a bet and had to pay it up this morning. I lived enough of it. All right.
My thing with Michigan is when Rich Rodriguez took over, he set the program back 10 years, and this is the first year where they actually resemble the team from the 90s or the 2000s. Every other year, I felt that the team was undermanned, and this year, even though they were good, they were still undermanned at certain positions. They didn't have the same athletes that Ohio State had. Ohio State's athletes, they showed up to play against Michigan, and you know, they have more seniors and juniors, top recruits from a top recruiting class than Michigan has. And the reason Michigan doesn't have the stockpile full of talent is because Rich Rodriguez completely left the cupboard completely bare. And Brady Hoke had to fill it up a little bit, and now it's finally filled up to where even though they got blown out, I actually, for the first time, was like, this season, I was like, okay, we're going to be good. We're going to be good in 3 years and 4 years and 2 years. We're going to be back to Michigan where every year we're a top 5 team. And the last 10 years, I just felt that we were almost, there were some years I thought we weren't even good enough to be in the MAC conference, let alone the Big Ten.
Damn.
Yeah, we were losing the MAC teams for a while there.
right.
Appalachian
So at
fucking
least
state.
we're on an upwards trajectory. And now that loss hurt, but obviously our offensive line wasn't good enough, and neither was our secondary.
And we lost two of our
Athlete-wise.
best players.
And
too.
that'll get fixed.
Yeah.
But let's go back to wrestling. I'm really not the expert on football.
Oh, you could have fooled me, man. But so you still lived in Detroit during your whole ECW run, or the Detroit area?
Yes. Yeah, I was still living with my mom in Troy through the entire ECW run. I didn't make very much money in ECW. You know, it was just more like it was awesome to be able to travel and to be able to be around, you know, a wrestling company that wasn't corporate, that was kind of doing things our own way and able to have freedoms that no wrestlers today enjoy. So So that was a blast, but I really didn't make. I mean, probably made $500 to $700 a week my whole time in ECW.
So
And
with you being from here, how did you even end up getting hooked up with Paulie and ECW in the first place?
okay, here we go. Okay. This is the honest truth. Okay. I'm not lying to you. This is 100% honest truth that most people don't know about.
Oh, this should be interesting.
Okay. When I got into the business, I broke into the business just doing the Detroit independent scene.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sabu was wrestling at a local level, and he was by far and away the best wrestler. Avid wrestling fan. I watched WWF, WCW, watched all of their programming, wanted to get into the business, went to Coach Kurt's wrestling shows, finally talked to some of the wrestlers. Al Snow was the one that trained me and my friend Steve. we went down and trained with Al Snow. We would start doing these independent shows, and I would see Sabu, and I noticed he was every move he did was original, and he was so far ahead of the guys you would see on TV. I was like, man, he is so good of a wrestler.
Right.
And he was in Japan. So I tried to get a job in Smoky Mountain Wrestling because they were a big time, they were in the magazines, and nothing in Detroit would ever make the magazines.
Right.
So I kind of felt like I have to go, and if I want to be in this business, I got to work for a bigger company. So I tried, and Jim Cornette, obviously wasn't wanting to use a referee. So then I went to ECW because ECW was in the magazine. So I got with a couple guys, and we drove out to Philadelphia to ECW Arena, and this is before Paulie was the booker. And we tried to get a tryout. We called Eddie Gilbert. He said maybe we could get a tryout. So they let us into the building for free, but they didn't let us in the dressing room. Obviously, we didn't get a tryout. Right. So I went to the show in ECW, and the fans are shitting on every single wrestler that walks through that curtain. From Don Morocco to the Sandman to Ted Petty to Jimmy Snuka, everybody they brought in, the fans just absolutely shit on. There was 300 to 400 fans, and they were all hardcore, observer reading fans.
Right.
And on the drive home, I remember thinking to myself, if Sabu wrestled in front of that crowd, they would not shit on him. They wouldn't. That's exactly what they want.
Wait.
So I went back to Detroit, Michigan.
Hey John, quick.
Every time I saw,
quick question: was at the time was this Eastern Championship Wrestling?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Just wanted to clarify that for everybody.
Yeah. This was probably the summer, I want to say, of '93.
Okay.
Yes, it was the summer of 1993. Okay, so then when I drove back, I knew that if Sabu wrestled in front of that crowd, he would get over huge. Okay, so when I went back to Detroit, every time I would see Sabu on the independents, I would always try to convince him to go to ECW. First 2 or 3 times, he was like, "I'm tired of you. I don't want to listen to you." And I kept telling him, "You got to go to ECW. You got to go to ECW." I was like, you'll be the most over, you'll be the champ, you'll be in the magazines. And, I had the wrong approach on why I wanted to go there.
Right.
Then he went there and he got over huge. It was exactly as I predicted. That he would go there, and the first match he had, the very next time, he was the most over wrestler, and they chanted his name, and he built that company for the first year. Without Sabu, ECW would not exist. And I was the one that saw that when I was at that show. So then next time I saw Sabu, he was like, I said, "Is there any way I could ever get into ECW?" And he was like, "Absolutely." And then he flew me in on his freaking flyer miles, Philadelphia. And then Paulie, he told Paulie to hire me as a referee because I was the one that told him to go there in the first place. So that's how I got into ECW. That's how I was able to get plane tickets and smoke marijuana in the dressing room. And, not in the dressing room, but not have to follow the code of conduct that the other wrestlers did, because I was like, this was my motherfucking vision. I'm the one that went to the building and saw this crowd and knew that this wrestler would get over in front of that crowd. And then every wrestler that got over in ECW had a little bit of Sabu in it. Every single wrestler that got over after that took a little bit of Sabu's character in order to get over in front of that crowd. And even today, all the wrestlers do that. So that was how I got into ECW. But no, honestly, I didn't like it. Towards the end, when Paulie went on TNN,
Yeah.
the Nashville network, towards the end of ECW,
Right.
that's when I had a falling out with ECW because I was so pissed because Paulie could have gotten on Fox Sports 1 and had a daytime time slot of like 4 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern time,
So
and it would have
basically
been
like TNA.
Monday through Friday, and he didn't want it because he didn't want to put a tape show, and he didn't want to be blocked by local sporting events, and I was like, no, you have to take that. That's the best time slot we can have because you got kids coming home from school that will watch that, and if the programming is good, they'll watch it for another 10 or 15 years. You got a built-in audience. And Paulie did not want that time slot. So instead he took the TNN time slot, which sucked. Because if there's one secret in professional wrestling that a lot of people don't understand, it's your wrestling television show is based on the network that you're on. That's why WWE sucks so bad. It's because it's on the USA Network. Do you ever watch the USA Network?
Burn
No.
notice.
Who watches the USA Network? Old women. Do old women watch wrestling? No. So why is WWE on that network? It doesn't fit. The WWE or any wrestling company, if you want to be popular, it depends on the network you're on. If TNA was on ESPN, they'd be the number one wrestling company in the country because they'd be on ESPN. So it's all based on what network you're on. And most networks, wrestling just doesn't fit. And that proves that the sports entertainment male soap opera is a joke. Because if this is a male soap opera, you should be able to get on any one of these channels.
So you're
So-
saying NCIS
Because it's
is
not a
good
male
leading.
soap opera. It's a sport. And that's why the only way it will work is you have to try to get on one of these sporting networks.
So
And if you do that, what's up?
to go off of what you just said, you mentioned how when Paulie went to TNN, that was when you had your fallout. Can you tell us a little bit
Yes.
about, you were there from the beginning. Can you tell us a little
Right.
bit more about the dynamic of what it was like for you guys on your way up and what really it was like for you guys to
Okay.
be as it went down?
On the way up, it was a bunch of hot characters just running the Northeast. We went down to Florida a little bit. We weren't really, and we knew that the Northeast wrestling crowd was one of the most rabid, and it was Vince McMahon's territory, and the fact that we were able to get such a following in those northeastern towns, we knew that we were onto something. But there was always, about us always about us going national, and us, getting national television and becoming more of a national company. But those of us in the dressing room, we knew that ECW was so poorly ran that there was no way that this was ever going to be a national company.
Really?
Anybody with any intelligence, like we've all had jobs. Sometimes you have a job and you know that whether it's a restaurant or a hotel, you know that things are not being done right and you know they're not going to be in business very long. And sometimes you have a job and you know things are done right. Well, ECW, just the way everything was so poorly put together, from the promoters, the way it was promoted, the way that you got your plane tickets, to the way you got paid. I mean, you get paid at 6 o'clock in the morning the next day. And it was just so many things that were just so off that everybody kind of knew. And at that point, that's when Paulie was trying to sell us that we were going to be a national company. And those of us that had been around knew that this wasn't going to happen. That's why so many people jumped. That's why so many people went to other companies. So the whole on the way up really died after probably the third or fourth pay-per-view. I mean, people once Taz and the Dudleys left, there was no more like on the way up. At that point, it was just like.
Well, yeah, once the Taz and Dudleys left, I mean, those are your two of your big cogs. So, I mean, once they went, I could see how that would change it. But that's crazy to hear that side of it, because then when you hear a lot of other interviews, like when you hear, like you mentioned Al Snow, like Al Snow said on record a bunch of times that he never thought that it was going to fold until things started to go down, because, how much time Paul was putting into it and how, like you said, he would try to sell everybody on the vision. So it's interesting to hear like that opposite perspective.
Yeah, the first pay-per-view, everybody believed in the company. We did that little angle with WWE. And then after the second, I'd say the third, once we started doing pay-per-views and nothing was really happening, and then Paulie started saying we need a national television promote, and I agreed with him. Like I said, I knew, and I think at least my inner circle, anybody that I talked to knew when he turned down the FS1 and went on the national network, because like I was talking about networks, the national network was not for ECW. ECW fans didn't watch the national network. So that just wasn't a good fit. And it proved not to be a good fit because that ended up really hurting. The shows were no good, and that really ended up hurting the company, which made them go out of business. But once I was like, the national network, like, no, this is going to be bad. Just like when they brought ECW back and it was on Sci-Fi.
Yeah, we don't talk about that on this show.
WWE.
It's never going to work.
Yeah,
you have to understand your audience. You need a wrestling show on a channel that people that are going to watch wrestling watch when wrestling's not on.
Right.
That's what you need. And if you don't have that, well, then it's automatically going to be a failure.
Hi, John.
Because
this is Kyle.
You don't want it on a channel that you don't skip through if you're a wrestling fan and wrestling's not on, whatever's on your remote. I mean, it's hard to change it to a channel that you never watch. That's So yeah, I knew at the TNN point.
Go ahead, Kyle.
It was over with. And I tried to get Sabu out of ECW. I didn't even want to go back originally because after I went to ECW, I had a deal in New Japan.
Really?
And when I was in New Japan, Sabu tried to talk me into leaving New Japan to go back to ECW, and I never should have done it, but I let him talk me into going back. So I kind of felt like I made my own bed there. But I always wanted to go to WWE.
So, John, this is Kyle, the other Kyle. I'm actually from the greater Pennsylvania area in Philadelphia. I was in Westchester and Chester, Pennsylvania. So,
Yeah.
tell some of the people about the area, about how Pennsylvania and specifically Philadelphia, the fans there are unlike any other fans you actually ever really see in any other local markets because it's just a great sports town.
Yes. Yeah, it is. When you look at New York and then you look at Boston and Philadelphia, New York is the big fish. New York is the most popular city in that area. And Boston, they're very jealous of New York, and it shows. Anytime you go to Boston, you see the jealousy of New York. And when you go to New York, you see the pompous New York mentality. And Philadelphia does it absolutely right, where they understand that there's a little inferiority when it comes to New York, but they're so passionate and they're so mean when they have to be that they make up for it just with their, like I said, how rabid that fan base is. And whether it's wrestling, whether it's football, whether it's soccer, I think the U.S. soccer team should play all their games in Philadelphia.
Really?
Because right now when the U.S. soccer team plays, it's a bunch of Mexicans or Hondurans watching them play. Okay, send them to Philadelphia and let them get a hold of Philly fan. They're not going to like coming to U.S. soccer games anymore.
So speaking about that, what for you being there for as long as you were with ECW, it's kind of like a two-part question, but what do you think was the hottest thing they ever had in ECW, like as far as an angle, and what was the craziest thing that you were ever a part of?
Oof. The hottest angle was the one I came up with that Paulie didn't do.
Uh-oh.
Where I wanted Chris Candido and Tammy when they were in the middle of their drugs and it was all over the internet how they were fucked up.
Yeah.
I wanted them to win a title and quit the company and go to independent shows and then put them wrestling some independent guy. Obviously, Chris would win and have it be like a Bonnie and Clyde type Natural Born Killers, which I think was the hot movie back then with Woody Harrelson.
Wow, yeah.
So I wanted the angle to kind of be like these two people run off the rails. You know, they're doing drugs, they're going to sex parties, they're doing all this crazy stuff, and they've even left the company, and he's got the belt. And I said, just give him like a 2 or 3 month run where they're off TV, but you still put him on TV on the fan cam because he's still the champion. And I said, when he comes back to ECW Arena, that place will become unglued because they were so over at the time for being fuck ups, Chris and Tammy.
Right.
Paul didn't want to do it. So I like my angle. The hottest thing was Sabu. Was Sabu when he first got in there. And then after Sabu, the hottest thing was Rob. But there's no question, the hottest thing in ECW was when Sabu first got there and he wrestled against Terry Funk, he wrestled against Shane Douglas, and then his feud with Taz.
Well, what was that like? What was that like for you guys when Rob went? Speaking of Rob, what was that like when he went over and you had already spoke about it a little bit, but like the angle you guys did with WWF, you know, like what was that like for you guys?
It because I was begging those guys. I said, Vince wants to use you guys. You need to go. You need to get out of here. This was before Taz and the Dudleys left. The first guys Vince wanted was Sabu and Rob, and they turned him down. I was so pissed. I was like, what? You know, because like I said, you knew that ECW had so many deficiencies that it was not going to last 10 years. There's no way with Jim Molyneux and Debbie Beaumont as your main staff underneath the boss, Paulie, that there's no way that you're going to be able to get the proper amount of work done in order to be a national company. So I was upset. The thing with WWE was Paulie hooked it up because Paulie was at the time working with WWE. So, the ECW talent there knew that it really wasn't a direct tryout with WWE. And if they were to quit, if they wanted a job in WWE, you either had to go through Paulie or you had to quit ECW outright. If you quit ECW outright, they probably might not get a job in WWE. You know?
Yep. So
the mentality when we went there, we only went there like 2 or 3 times. It was weird. The WWE wrestlers didn't like us, which I hated because I had been to Japan, so I knew a lot of those guys, and you could tell that they looked at us kind of as like an enemy.
Right.
And then Paulie and Jerry Lawler go out there and shoot at each other in the ring and like a debate where they're talking about personal stuff. And I'm just like, why are we doing this? This is so bad. And then we never went back. So, like I said, I wanted to work in WWE because I knew that that's where I was going to make the most money and have the best impact. But the guys I was with, Sabu and Rob, did not want to in WWE.
Well, I got a question about the referees in ECW. Basically, to me, the big 3 is yourself, Jim Molyneux, and John Finnegan. So do you still talk to any of those guys? And what was it like with you,
no.
3 of you guys being in the referees?
No. They were friendly to me, but they knew that I was in with Sabu, and that was why I was reffing there. They pretty much ate up all the best matches. I would have rather refereed the better matches, but I really I did get along with them, got along with everybody, but no, I don't keep in contact with them. I don't keep in contact really with anybody in wrestling at all.
Really?
I kind of want this generation to pass, so then the next generation can sprout up, and then I hope to have a major impact with the next generation of wrestling. This generation to me is dead.
Well, that kind of leads me into my next question. I've watched a couple shoot interviews that you did. It's particularly one in like 2007 where you seemed particularly upset with how wrestling was going at that time. And that was 10, 11 years ago. And I watched a few of your videos now on your Facebook page, and you seem to have calmed down a little bit, but you still seem like you're not happy with the product. And I feel like we kind of have the same thoughts on it. So what was it about in 2007 that had you upset, and what is it now that has you upset about the product?
Okay, in 2007, I felt that in 2007 I felt that WWE was trying to push the way that they were trying to push their hero wrestler was way too predictable. And I remember trying, because at the time we were in war in Iraq, and a lot of the top brass in WWE was for that war, and it just seemed to me that it looked like with their top baby faces, they were trying, not necessarily like a USA gimmick, but John Cena did that movie, The Marine.
Yeah.
And that kind of bothered me, because I kind of felt like you're trying to brainwash the people into this type of into your political views, and I don't think that that's what people watch this business for. And I was right, because they never got John Cena over. They tried to get him over, and it was always the same thing. In the red states that are Republican, John Cena was over. So was Roman Reigns. But in the Democratic states, they're not over. So it's obvious that I was right 10 years ago when I said, 10 years ago I knew about the political divide in the country, because it started with the Bush-Gore election.
Right.
That's what really started when they were talking about Chads in Florida. Before that, politics didn't matter. But politics matter now. And as that divide continues to get wider and wider, you can't get a universal babyface over. I mean, there's nothing that there's no person that's over. When you go to Facebook and you see half of the people talk about how much they hate Trump, the other half of people talk about how much they love him. You're wasting your energy. You're not changing anybody's mind. The people who love him are still going to love him. People who hate him are still going to hate him. You can't get a superstar in wrestling that both of those sides are going to like. So I saw that 10 years ago, and I'm still saying it today. Now it's even worse, because they tried to get Roman Reigns over with no political, and they still won't buy it. And it's pretty obvious the type of wrestlers that the Democratic states support and the type of wrestlers that the Republican states support are completely different.
Have you watched much of NXT though?
I really don't watch much NXT.
Gotcha. See, now to me, that's one of the better things that's out. Period. Right now, like I feel like if you watch,
I'm sure it is.
Two of
I'm
them,
sure it is.
It's they're totally different.
Right. Okay. But if they had, here's the thing: if NXT could get somebody that was over, okay, he'd go to WWE, and then he's going to get caught up in that political.
Can't argue that.
Like every wrestler there does, and they don't. It's almost as if they don't even know it's coming. But it's just the way it is. You're going to have to. Wrestling is going to have to understand that the way you make money in today's wrestling, you can't get political. But you have to take the people that Trump would most likely people that go to shoot their guns, hunt, people that you would think live in Idaho or Nebraska. You have to have that pool of people.
Shout out to our fans.
And then you have to
Nebraska.
you have to have your people that you figure New York and California will support. And when they fight each other, that's when you should be able to get the whole country energized, because they'll want to see these characters fight each other, because these are the characters that they loathe or love on a daily basis.
Well, John, you brought up something on one of your Facebook Live videos, and I'll let somebody else ask a question, but you brought up an idea that I thought was great, and like the WWE lost out on a huge opportunity when they did the World Cup. And basically, in a nutshell, your idea is that actually have people from different countries represent the World Cup.
You mean use common sense?
Wait a second. You mean use people that are actually born and represent their own countries actually fighting a World Cup to determine who's the best in the world? That's bullshit.
Well, but John's idea was like even further than that. So John, why don't you go ahead and let the people in on what your idea was? I thought it was genius.
Well, you would have a tournament in 16 different countries, and the winner of those 16 tournaments would then play in the World Cup of Wrestling. Now, that was the same thing that I just talked about when it comes to the political divide. It's just this would be like you would take Turkey, you would take Greece, which are two countries that have been at odds for 170 years. You could take Romania, you could take countries that don't necessarily get along. England and
Scotland,
Russia,
the EU,
Ireland, yeah.
Germany and France.
Right.
You could take countries that don't necessarily get along, and you can make it about that divide. Oh, the guy who won the French tournament versus the guy who won the German tournament. That should get people from France and Germany interested. So it's the same. It's the same concept, but the concept of the World Cup of Wrestling would be you have 16 invitational tournaments in 16 different countries. And each one of those tournaments is like the U.S. Open, the Japan Open, whatever. And then the winner of those would then every 4 years wrestle for the World Cup of Wrestling, which is only given out every 4 years. So once you win that tournament, you're the champion of the world for 4 years.
They'll probably bring it.
So that would have added meaning, where wrestling fans understand you can win the belt, but if Vince McMahon or the booker wants, you could lose the belt the next day. So wrestling fans understand that even though you feel good when your favorite wrestler wins the belt, you know goddamn well he could lose it the next week. There ain't shit you can do about it. Well, the World Cup of Wrestling, you're the champ for 4 years. Ain't nobody can take that away from you. So that would add intrigue and prestige to that tournament.
Yeah, I thought it was a good idea, and a part of that too. From the video that you put up on Facebook was that WWE would actually start getting a stronghold in some of these other countries. Like I think you brought up that South America and Africa are two places that the WWE needs to be going to.
Definitely.
Yeah. I think you said Brazil as well. Like I think you saying those are two places that
did
you
say
need to
Brazil.
go.
Brazil could, but let me tell you something about Africa, okay? Since we have already talked about other sports, let me tell you, okay, when you look at football, American football, and you look at American basketball, right?
Right.
You've got so many inner city black youth in America playing those games from the age of 4 years old. You got kids playing football, and you got kids playing basketball in every single city in America, okay? And they play it their whole life.
Right.
So how the hell does Ezekiel Ansah get drafted 3rd overall? How does Jaleel Okafor or Joel Embiid, these African guys, get drafted ahead of every single American? And they've only been playing the game for 2, 3, 4 years. Because they have athletic ability that is off the charts. And WWE does not take advantage of that. The closest they have is Kofi Kingston.
They got Apollo Crews too, but they don't do anything with him.
Who? Wait, was he in that movie that just came out last weekend, Apollo Creed?
No, Apollo Crews. Crews.
The name sounds familiar, but I don't think I've seen the gentleman lately.
He's starting to get another push, but yeah, they basically forgot about him for like 2-3 years.
Well, that brings me to another question. You talked a lot about how things could be political in wrestling and politics in general. That brings me to ask you, when ECW was rolling, and obviously they had some of the most controversial angles you're ever gonna see in a wrestling company. What were your thoughts on like some of the risks that they took? A, but B, do you think that maybe some of the controversy that was involved is what's missing in today's product, or do you think that something like that, at least a watered down version of it, would help the product today?
No, I think that was a different time period. You have to go back to 1983 when Vince McMahon made wrestling popular again. He made wrestling popular with a very young audience. That young audience then grew up. So since they grew up, you couldn't use the same programming. So ECW, the Attitude Era, and WCW were playing to an older audience because that audience had already been hooked on wrestling 10 years earlier by Vince McMahon. Today, we have lost the young audience. Okay, and by trying to do controversial things is not how you hook them in because it doesn't work. the way when you look at ratings and you see that the ratings go from 4.2 to 4.1 to 4.0, every year they drop a little bit, and they always drop kind of after WrestleMania, and then they kind of hold steady a little bit and then drop again. And there's never been, it doesn't matter who they put the belt on, it doesn't matter what angle that they run, it doesn't matter if whatever they try to do, they try to, Shane McMahon comes out and says he's gay, like whatever shock thing they'll try to do, it's not going to work. Because when you look at the slow drip of how it goes from 4 to 3.5 to 3.4 to 3.3, every year it drops a little bit. That's not because of these fans out there crying, "Oh, Daniel Bryan didn't win. I'm never watching wrestling again." That's not the fan that stopped watching wrestling. The fan that stopped. The problem with wrestling today is bad segments on television. There are so many bad segments. And when people watch these bad segments, eventually they turn it off. And maybe they might turn it back on, but eventually they get sick of watching bad segments. And then what they do is they wait till WrestleMania, and then they just lose. They just fade away. They don't sit there and complain on the internet about what's going on. They just stop watching because eventually you're just tired of these bad segments. And it's not just that the segments are so bad. It's that their transition in between from segment to segment is equally as bad. The fact that WWE has their commentator is also the narrator of the show is so bad. It makes the show unwatchable, and they've been doing it for 30 years. You need a narrator. Like, okay, people complain about Raw that it's 3 hours long. Last I checked, the NFL starts at 1 o'clock and ends at 11 o'clock. But look at how the NFL transitions from their segment. They go from a studio to the commentators on the field, back to the studio, then to the dressing room to the reporter, back to the studio, into a different studio, into different commentators. Okay, WWE only has 2 commentators, and they're talking to you for 3 hours. And then they have these long segments where people are on the microphone, and it just kills the crowd. It just completely takes all the life out of the crowd. And then they go out there and wrestle, and the crowd's already dead. Like, they have got to have better transition from the actual wrestling to some sort of studio or something that they can get off of, so it's not always on the live crowd. And then they have to have better segments. They can't have these segments. I don't know how some of these segments get on WWE TV, because I mean, some of them are just so bad that even wrestling fans that love wrestling can't defend them. Like, how are you putting these bad segments on TV? How do they keep getting on TV? It doesn't matter. Well, you've gone through so many writers, and you keep putting bad segments on TV. I mean, you're bringing back Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker. What the hell are you doing? Are you trying to get the 44-year-old man who has 2 kids and a wife to start getting into wrestling again? He was in wrestling when he was in college. Okay, he liked The Undertaker and he liked Shawn Michaels, but he's 45 years old now. He's not getting back into wrestling. He's not getting the band back together. Are you bringing in Shawn Michaels and Undertaker to draw 16-year-old kids? Because that's not working. Okay, why are you bringing these guys in? What's the point?
I agree.
It just doesn't make any sense.
That's Saudi money.
Kyle, you got a question, man?
Yeah. So, John, when did you leave ECW?
When did I leave ECW? Oh, I left ECW. I want to say maybe 2000. I think they had one more pay-per-view after I left. I left because I knew nobody. I mean, Sabu had gotten paid like I think $12,000 in cash. And I knew this was the last money we were ever going to get.
Yeah, that's something we've always heard. Like, listen to anything about ECW.
I said, let's go. You know, we went to XCW right after that. Because there was no way, and that was so Sabu would wrestle on his last pay-per-view match. I forget what that was. The last time I remember ECW was like I said, right before the TNN when we had Sid Vicious. And I was pushing I said, you got to push Sid Vicious. I mean, and Paulie was too expensive. Paulie didn't want to push him. And Steve Corino was the champion. You know, in the original ECW, when ECW was hot, we had Devin Storm, and we buried him because he was like the local New Jersey wrestler. He was like the top independent guy in New Jersey. We brought him in and buried him. And then 3 years later, we get Steve Corino, which is basically the same thing as Devin Storm, the guy from New Jersey that's the top indie guy that was pretty much the same ability, and they give him the fucking belt. I was like, we're done.
When did everybody else see the writing was on the wall?
To me, when Steve Corino, when the same New Jersey guys that we used to bury were coming in and getting pushes, I knew it was over. Because the whole point of ECW was we're bringing in these guys, and the local guys that wrestle on all the other independent shows around here, when they come to ECW, they get squashed. And that was the reputation we had. And then it all of a sudden changed, where the top independent guys were getting a push. That's when I knew that it wasn't going to pass.
So I got a question off of something that I had just watched recently. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the whole thing when that thing went down with Mike Awesome, if you were still around. Were you still around by that point?
Oh, when Mike Awesome threw the belt down.
Yeah, and then they had to do
Mike
the
Awesome
shit
was
with
owed a lot of
Taz.
money. Well, again, he was in our clique. So Mike Awesome, I went through that the whole time. I remember Mike Awesome telling me how much money Paulie owed him, and he said, you know, WCW wants me to work, and Paulie was just like, he was the champ, and Paulie wouldn't pay him. You know, Paulie he would lie to the wrestlers and tell them, oh, I'll give you a $10,000 pay-per-view bonus, and then never pay him. So Mike Awesome was just tired of. So yeah, I mean, at the time he was my friend, so I really didn't care. Again, at that time, I was trying to get out of ECW.
Gotcha.
And get into WWE. So during that whole thing, I was like, I'm sure Paulie was pissed. I'm sure Tommy Dreamer and the Dudleys were pissed, or whoever was. But again, at that point, I knew, you know, that was towards the end.
So,
I mean, in all honesty, Mike Awesome shouldn't even have been champion.
Ooh.
Damn, he was almost over. But Paulie was so that he didn't want one guy to be able to hold him up. So that's why Rob was always in the main events. But yet he wasn't. He was the TV champ, and he'd always have the world champion around whoever else, Shane or Mike Awesome, and they would be like right after intermission. That doesn't make sense. Why is it the main event?
Right.
And the world champion after intermission? Well, that's because Paulie didn't want to give Rob the title, because then Rob could hold him up for more money. Wow. And then in the end, Mike Awesome held him up for more money and threw the belt in the fucking garbage can. So there you go, Chiefs.
Man. All right.
That's what you get for being cheap in wrestling.
So here's a question about the Detroit scene. I was too young to go to ECW shows at the time, but I remember ECW used to run the state fairgrounds a lot. Do you have any stories of ECW?
I got the building for them.
Really?
First, It was the Inkster Rec Center. Yeah, because I was the one. Yeah. First, I got the Inkster Rec Center. We ran that, I think, a couple times. And then I got the state fairgrounds. Yeah. I was right down Woodward.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I mean, at the time, I wanted to get the Premier Center because they used to run wrestling there, but they had just shut that place down.
Okay.
And I went down to talk to the guy from the state fairgrounds, and I forget. I think it was like $1,500. I can't remember. Maybe $2,000 to rent it. And then I told Paul, and yeah, we ran the show with very little promoting, to be all honesty, and it still drew real well.
Have you ever?
We ran there.
Have you ever thought about promoting a show of your own? I mean, you sound like you have ideas.
I'm not a promoter. I'm not a natural hustler.
Okay.
And I feel that I'm a booker, is what I am. So I would be on the creative end of a wrestling company. I would not be the promoter. So I would need a good promoter and a good promoting team in order to sell my wrestling ideas and wrestling. And in all honesty, the promoter is the one that's most vital, and he's the one that should make the most money. And in today's wrestling, the promoter is usually also a wrestler, so he's not able to really promote. So there are no natural promoters. There's very little. That's one. So a big problem in independent wrestling is you had these real promoters your show because they were making money. The old school promoter from the 80s didn't care who was on the card. He just wanted to fill that building so he could get half the house.
Right.
He made a living off of promoting wrestling, and he could care less whether this guy's going over or the direction of the show. He doesn't care. He just needs a wrestling show that's going to be enough quality where the people ain't going to complain, so he can keep making money. And they're just not here anymore. Now the promoter is also a wrestler, so he's not able to give his full heart and soul to promoting. That's why you only see a couple hundred people at these shows, and not 1,500, 2,000 people.
But
so yeah, I wish I knew some good promoters.
So if someone offered you a job to be a booker, would you take it?
Yes, absolutely.
Interesting.
And I would implement my system, my fast-paced wrestling system. I would implement it, and within 6 months, I would have the best wrestling company,
Sounds like
in-ring wrestling in the world.
Sounds like
even better than New Japan.
Like a Festivus for the rest of us.
So let me let you in on that inside joke, John. Us here at Knockouts and 3 Counts have these dreams of putting on like one wrestling show. Just one of those things, not necessarily to make money. It's just one of those things where it's like we've always wanted to do it.
A kegger.
Yeah, just to live our dream. You know, find people that we want on the show that we can actually afford to bring in.
Faye Jackson, Tara Logan.
Yeah, or like somebody I know that you know, Human Tornado. I know you've had interactions with him.
Yeah, a friend of mine. Yeah,
Congo Kong.
Yeah, we had him on the show. Congo Kong. We want to get these people on a show that we put together. So 3 guys that really don't know much about the wrestling business. What advice would you give us on putting together a one-time show? Besides, don't do it.
Let me tell you this. Straight. You shouldn't do it if it's just a one-time show. If you really want, if you're really smart, and you should do it to make money, and figure that you can make $100,000. Like 3 of you?
Yeah.
I don't know if 3 of you can make $100,000. You could probably each make somewhere close to $50,000 if you work together. You could probably get close to 50. You probably start at 30,000, but you could probably get it up to 50,000 a year or two. But the key is just promote the show. Don't worry about the wrestlers. It's not about the wrestlers per se. You know, I know you say, well, the reason you have the wrestlers in mind is because you want a good quality show.
Right.
Okay, that's where you have to trust the booker. And just like there aren't very many promoters, there aren't very many bookers. So a booker for your show, like if there's 3 of you, okay, I would one of you, whoever's got the most creative wrestling mind, should be the booker, and the other 2 should go out and promote.
Okay.
And then the booker needs to get the budget. He needs to book the wrestlers. He needs to while these other guys are out there promoting every day. That booker ain't just sitting on his butt watching TV. He needs to constantly be running that show through his head and figuring out how it can be perfect, so where the fans aren't going to shit on anything. You leave nothing to chance. You go over every match. You go over how you transition from match to match. You go over every promo. You go over how you're going to tell the boys what you want done in the match. And then you even understand, okay, well, what if something goes wrong? What if Human Tornado's flight gets canceled? He can't make it.
Right.
You have to come up with backup plans. So the booker needs to be thinking about the show for 40 hours a week. And that's a problem with wrestling today. You expect to draw 900 people, and you put the show together in 2 hours. Most of these independent shows are booked in 2 to 4 hours. They just take a piece of paper, they write down some matches, and that's it. That it takes a lot more. This is, again, if you expect people to come to the show and spend their money and enjoy the show, that's a 40-hour-a-week job. And you need to constantly be playing it in your head in like a meditation form, to where you have the show in your head. You don't need to look at a list. You don't need to look at the matches. You don't need to write anything down. It's all in your head. You go right up to each wrestler. You know exactly what you want. The wrestlers will respect you if you can walk up to them and you know exactly what you want. You know exactly every match and how you want each match to transition into the next match. So the 2 guys that are promoting it promote full time, And the one guy that's booking it books full time. If you do that, you can be successful.
So that brings me to another question. So since you've given us a little bit of a peek into your wrestling mind and creative mind with that kind of stuff, if you can think back, is there anybody from either side, whether it be WCW, WWF, or even New Japan, if you want to throw them in too, that if you had the chance when ECW was still going strong, that you would have liked to have seen how they would have done in ECW?
Bret Hart?
Yeah, that would have been a good name.
I mean, I would say Steve Austin, but Paulie,
had him.
again, Paulie had him lose to Mikey Whipwreck when he got there because he knew he couldn't afford him, which is bad booking. That's the other thing. You want to be a good booker when you want to run your little shows? I'm with you. But when you bring somebody in, if you don't like him and you know that he's a damn good wrestler, don't have him lose to your local guy thinking that the fans will know why you're doing this and they won't like it. The better wrestler should win each match. When you look at two wrestlers, the guy who's tougher, because you should look, as a booker, you should look at both guys. Who would win in a fight between these two guys? 80% of the time, that's who should win your match. And when you go to the other 20%, there needs to be a tactical reason why he won, even though he's not the tougher guy.
That's fair.
That's how you book.
So you mentioned Bret Hart. Is there anybody else you can think of other than Bret that you personally would have liked seeing come in?
Rick and Scott Steiner.
It's a Michigan connection.
Man, could you imagine a match with either them two versus the Eliminators or any of that kind of stuff? That would have been dope.
That they would have killed the Eliminators.
I know that, but I'm just saying the Eliminators, or I mean anyone you want to name, even the Dudleys when they were hot for them. That would have been dope too. Robin Sabu.
They would have killed everybody else up until Robin Sabu. I mean, Lance Storm and Just Incredible. No, they would have killed them. They would have totally killed the Gangsters. They would have killed them. They would have went right through everybody. I would have said the Road Warriors, but the Road Warriors by the time of ECW, I loved the 1983 Road Warriors in ECW. Would have been the best thing ever.
Kyle, you got.
But 1983 Road Warriors were in 1983.
Kyle, you got one last question for our guest before we got to wrap this up pretty soon.
Real quick, what do you see that could really energize the current American wrestling scene? Like New Japan already has their niche of how they do their shows. What do you think is one thing WWE could add to get the fans back to go from 2 million?
Okay, I'm gonna be honest
with
5. You. They need to connect with the streets. I'm not just talking about urban, in black neighborhood kids. I'm talking about rich white kids are listening to hip hop music. And the fact that when you look at Kofi Kingston or you look at the black wrestlers on WWE, look at the black wrestlers that do independence. Look how they dress, look how they act, right? You can tell it's natural. But suddenly, when you get to WWE or TNA, you have to wear these silly colors. You have to do dance break. You have to be so corny.
Oh, thank you, John.
You cannot connect with the streets.
Damn it.
They need more black
You cannot connect with the innate streets that you need to connect with, not just to draw black people or kids from the urban areas, but you can't even get the rich white kids. They even think it's corny that Ron Killing's out there doing dance tricks. So you certainly need to connect with the streets. That is the most important. If I got hired by WWE tomorrow, the first thing I would do is I would call in Kofi Kingston and Ron Killings and all of the black wrestlers. And I would say, we need to connect with the streets. So I need a couple of you to be the thugs that can hang out in the projects and not get beat up. That, sits there in the corner at 4 a.m. Nobody messes with him because he's so tough. Then I need the 5-star athlete guy. I need the preacher's son. I need the bouncer at the bar. I need all these characters that live in the inner city community and are considered the tough guys in the inner city community. I need all of them in my wrestling company. And I need them to be able to connect to the streets. You need to talk like the rappers talk. You need to talk like the athletes talk. Stop talking like pro wrestlers.
Kyle?
Talk like the athletes. Talk like OBJ. And talk like Meek Mill.
Don't talk like the White House.
That's what I would tell them. And I would say, I need a couple of you guys just to be straight thugs, where you're never going to get beat up, but you can get pinned because you're not tactically sound. And then the way that they talk, the way they interact with each other, that would then connect you to the streets, which would then in turn get that rich white suburban audience that WWE desperately needs.
So crime.
And that's the only way they're going to get it.
More like the Street Profits, I think. Because they when the Street Profits first came out, I'm like, oh my God, this is Crime Time Part 2. But
I thought it was a knockoff on the Cheddar Boys when I heard the name.
That too. But I actually like the Street Profits. I feel like they fit that whole OBJ profile, like you're saying. But John, this is gonna be our last question. This is a question that we ask all of our wrestler personnel that come on the show. We've asked Human Tornado this question. We've asked everyone.
Congo Kong, Bischoff, all of them.
Right. We asked them, what are the locker room rules? Like, we're making our list of rules. I think Human Tornado said...
Who's writing this list down?
Is
it you, Collison?
We're actually going to write this down one day. But Human Tornado said, don't bring your baby mama or your kids into the locker room. Congo Kong said, wash your balls and your gear.
Tony Thunder said, wash your balls, too. He emphasized that heavily.
Make sure you shake hands. These are all like the locker room
After
rules
you wash your balls.
that we've.
Yeah, there's a lot of locker room etiquette.
Right, but if you would put one on
my
the
locker
list,
room
what you got?
etiquette. You know my locker room etiquette?
What's that?
Find the biggest, toughest wrestler and make sure you're friends with him. Make sure you're over with him.
That's
Make
gotten
sure
me
he
over
likes
well in life.
Let me tell you something. That's how I survived.
I can't even hate on that, dude.
And he needs to like me.
That's why I'm friends with
And
him.
if I can't get that, I don't want to be working here.
That was also the plot of Deadpool 2.
Some bitch stole from me.
All right, John. Thank you very much for being on the show, man. Is there anything that you need to promote? You need to get the word out there about?
No. Just hope you guys wish you guys luck with your show, and hopefully Detroit independent wrestling can get better, because I feel that Detroit could be another Philly, and could root up and become a strong independent wrestling city. I really believe that.
Okay. Any social
Wrestling is strong in Detroit.
Any social media for the people to follow you?
You can come on my Facebook. I might post a couple more videos, but that's pretty much it.
Okay. Well, John, thank you very much. We'd love to have you on the show again sometime, man.
Yes.
Yeah, sure. Hit me up.
All righty. Thank you. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks a lot, John.
For sure.
All right.
Good.
Did you?
Yeah, he totally cut him off.
Ladies and gentlemen, John Pee Wee Moore.
That was Ryan D that did that, too.
So, yeah, we got to get up out of here. I got to go to work in the morning. So let's go ahead and say our goodbyes and throw out our social medias. Mr.
Our
Collison.
goodbyes, like we're not going to see each other again.
Should we not remind everybody where we're going to be this month coming up?
Well, go ahead. Throw it out.
So December 28th, make sure you're watching out for
Did you fart? Are you
BCWA
whopping
29th.
it?
to 29th. Excuse me, I'm thinking of Monday Night Raw. I'll be there too. Anyway,
Give me my
December
thought.
29th, we'll be live from Cataclysm, BCWA. We brought you our show from the last event a little bit last week with Solo Darling and RJ City and all the other names from BCWA, and hopefully we'll have Truth Martini on there again soon. But if you want to come out and see a good Detroit indie show like we were just talking about, make sure you're there.
All right. And your social
You
media?
can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Detroit Knockout, and make sure you're following out our show page.
Mr. Campbell.
Team Chaos. Twitter, I might use it. Instagram, I use it more. Facebook, Kyle J. Campbell. You can find my other show, DC TV Multiverse Podcast, everywhere you listen to podcasts, and everyonewhocares.com.
All right. And I am Devin. You can follow me on Twitter at Devin63. That's DEVINTHE63. You can find me on Instagram at All Steak No Sizzle. All one word. Make sure you follow the All Steak No Sizzle podcast. I just put a new episode out, Trash in Michigan University.
And that's why I'm wearing my Michigan. Go Blue.
Make sure you-
Fire Hardball.
Make sure you join.
Already?
Fuck yeah, you never
Shut up.
watched
I'm talking. Make sure you join the Reality Era News page on Facebook where we talk wrestling. Hey, if you're looking for a car, check out SouthfieldQualityCars.com. Once you find your Toyota RAV4, go in there and say, hey, I want that car. And use the reference code 19309. You will receive $500 off your purchase. That's 19309 to receive $500 off. With all that being said, people, until next time.
Fuck your couch.
What you think I do is for push a fucking RAV4?
Peace.
Anytime you say that, I'm saying that.
Holy fuck, did I not expect him to be that cynical? Jesus
Well,
Christ.
Oh, you didn't watch any of the shoot videos, did you?
No, I didn't.
Oh, he's
Bro,
he's